Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tampa's virtual service on this Sunday morning. Our in-person Sunday services have still been suspended because of the rise in COVID infections in this county. And we hope that we might be back together soon. But today we're coming to you live from our various home locations. It was a cold night in Tampa last night, but hopefully you're going to hear things in the service today that might intellectually get you going, that might keep you around for a while. Our speaker is our own minister, General Jim McCumbra. He's going to talk to us on the third principle of Unitarian Universalism, which is encouraging spiritual growth in our communities. The word or the concept of spiritualism among Unitarian Universalists tends to generate a little controversy. So he's going to talk about what that means. If you're a first-time visitor today, thank you. And we hope that you're going to hear something that's going to bring you back for another session with us one Sunday. If you've been coming for a while, we hope you'll be generated enough interest that you might want to join us soon. And if you're a long-time member, thank you for your continued service that has been able to keep us open, keep our facilities operational, and in the long run helps make this community a living community. I want to start our service today with the stone ritual. Our stone ritual is the placing of 3 stones to help us get going this morning and get ourselves centered. The first stone, which I'm going to place, is one in which we could think about something that we've had during the past week that we consider a high point we want to remember. The second stone is, again, remembering something from the past week that we consider a sorrow or concern that we want to think about. And our last one is the stone. The third one sets our intention for the coming week. And now our chalice lighting the words will be given to us by the Reverend McCumbra.
And a good morning to everyone. These chalice lighting words come from the Reverend Cynthia Landrum. We light this chalice, the beacon that calls us to love, to justice, to a deepening of the spirit. And let me share these opening words to the service this morning. They come from Clark Dewey Wells. Spirit of life and hope, we turn our minds and hearts again toward thee. Awaken us again to the mysteries that humble us, the realities that orient us, the truths that judge and guide us, the beauty that informs and ravishes us, the love that nurtures us, the fellowship that sustains us, the creativity that heightens us and deepens and reorders our living, that we might give ourselves in honesty and openness to the larger life before us. And amen. Our opening hymn, one of the favorites of all Unitarian Universalist congregations everywhere, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots will be close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Words hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you, Dee. I've chosen a story for all ages this morning from Aesop, as has become my habit of late. This one entitled The Serpent and the Eagle. A serpent had succeeded in surprising an eagle and had wrapped himself around the eagle's neck. The eagle could not reach the serpent, neither with beak nor with claws. Far into the sky he soared, trying to shake the serpent off his neck, his enemy. But the serpent's hold only tightened, and slowly the eagle sank back to earth, gasping for breath. A countryman chanced to see the unequal combat. In pity for the noble eagle, he rushed up and soon had loosened the coiled snake from around the eagle's neck. The eagle was freed. The serpent, however, was furious. He had no chance to bite the watchful countryman. Instead, he struck at the drinking horn hanging at the countryman's belt, and into it he let fly the poison of his fangs. The countryman now went on toward home. Becoming thirsty on the way, he filled his horn at a spring and was about to drink. There was a sudden rush of great wings. Sweeping down, the eagle seized the poisoned horn from out of his savior's hands and flew away with it to hide it where it could never be found. So ends the story, but the moral, of course, an act of kindness is well repaid. Our reading for meditation this morning comes from Ken Nye. It's entitled Einstein on Time. Someone told me once that Einstein thought time is a variable. That is to say that time is not a constant. Are you following this? I think Einstein was right. When I was a child, a year was a year. Now a year is a week. When I was a child, a week was a whole bunch of days of limitless possibilities, so numerous that I planned ahead only so far as the afternoon. Now a week is a few meetings interspersed with frenetic activity that I have apparently convinced myself is important. Never mind enjoying the moment. Never mind stopping to smell the roses. Yesterday, a lifetime was forever, immeasurable, like a light year. But today, swirling in a mix of tomorrow and yesterdays, a light year is comprehensible, measurable, and finite. But let's not talk cosmic stuff. Let's not throw in big words to impress. If Einstein was right, and I think he was, where's the throttle? How do I slow this thing down? Indeed, so ends the reading. Let us enter together into a moment of silence. Our music for meditation this morning is a recording, an interesting recording you'll find, I think, of hymn number 208, Every Time I Feel the Spirit.
Greetings from Richmond, Virginia.
And thank you. One of my favorite themes for sermons is a focus on one of our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. Of course, nearly all my sermons are informed by our UU principles, but occasionally talking in depth about a specific principle is important as well. This morning, I want to share a reflection on our 3rd principle, our 3rd Unitarian Universalist principle, that we covenant to accept one another and to encourage spiritual growth in our congregations. Over the years and in many UU congregations, I've had enlightened conversations with both newer and seasoned Unitarian Universalists about spirituality. We've talked about it and how it makes itself present in our lives, or maybe does not. This manifestation may come to us through myth and metaphor, through poetry and music, through dance and visual arts, or simply by being in community with one another. These conversations often turn to how different our views of spirituality are. Spiritual growth, whatever that is, may be something we experience as uncomfortable, or even with disbelief. Or it may be something we find to be most meaningful. I have found these disparate reactions among both rookie and veteran UUs. Sometimes the degree of comfort with the idea of spiritual growth seems to relate to our religious roots. You see, I am in a somewhat of a minority as a lifelong, or at least nearly lifelong, UU. Most of us are come-inners. By that, I mean people who come into our tradition from another religious tradition, or perhaps from no religious tradition. Many of us could even be described as refugees from other traditions, institutions that we found lacking or overbearing. I'm reminded that spirituality in those types of religious environments can mean a wholehearted acceptance of somebody else's dogma. Spiritual growth means an increasing commitment to predetermined beliefs in those traditions. Critical spiritual exploration is discouraged. And in some of those environments, theological and spiritual diversity are really not tolerated. There may be only one recognized spiritual path, and members had better stick to it. The idea that we can be self-aware of spiritual meaning and devices, and that spirituality does not refer to a set of predetermined beliefs, are new to refugees from such communities. Something that takes some getting used to. I've had different personal experiences, having grown up in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Indeed, as a youth, I mostly rejected ideas of spirituality and the spiritual life. I thought spirituality is merely about emotions, and emotions are no more than some particular pattern of synapses firing in our brains. Then adulthood caught up with me, and I slowly began to experience certain things like love, how it feels to be creative, and an intense feeling of belonging to one community or another. And every once in a while, a deep sense of connectedness to reality, to creation, to the cosmos. I began to rethink whether spirituality is merely some purely emotional dimension or something else. These things I was experiencing seemed too complex to be simple emotions. So I began to entertain the notion that there is a spiritual dimension, a non-material dimension to our being that is worthy of exploration. Our third principle calls us to help one another grow spiritually. But this principle actually has two parts. The first is acceptance of one another. In a way, that's, to me, almost a restatement of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But the third principle calls us to practice the first on an interpersonal basis within our congregations. I just wish the group that put together our principles had used a stronger word than acceptance. To me, acceptance is passive. It's like the word tolerance. They both sound like the phrase to put up with. And suppose someone who is seriously exploring pagan, earth-centered worship and spirituality approaches a staunch traditional humanist at our coffee hour. The earth-centered person talks about their spiritual quest, perhaps even inviting the humanist to a worship circle. By this time, the humanist is standing there, silent, arms folded, in that universal body language pose that means, I'm tuning you out. We could say that the humanist is being accepting, tolerant of the earth-centered person. After all, the humanist response was not, you believe what? Oh my God, that's crazy. You see, even a humanist will occasionally blurt out the G word when they're under stress. To me, accepting and tolerating should be stronger. We need to be assertive in affirming the spiritual path of another person. Affirming is a good word, stronger than accepting in my view. But affirming is used in the introduction to the principle. So I guess it would be awkward to use it again. Validation might work, or perhaps confirmation or acknowledgement or embracing. All of these seem to me more proactive than acceptance. Actually, I had a coffee hour encounter similar to the pagan and humanist example I just shared. I had this many years ago. I was visiting a UU congregation regularly, not yet a member. A university colleague was a member, and we would often converse at coffee hour. I remember on one occasion having a spiritual, theological conversation with him. I was, as I recall, thinking about what sort of a God I could believe in. What would that God be like? I was in a long process, really, of morphing from atheism to agnosticism, to at least opening myself up a little bit spiritually. He chuckled at my ideas, made some insulting comment about my mental health, and strode off. Acceptance? Tolerance? No. Rejection? Encouragement? No. Discouragement. And after that Sunday, it was a couple of years before I came back to that congregation. Accepting, affirming, embracing does not mean that I am necessarily adopting your beliefs or that I am joining you on your spiritual path. But it does ultimately mean, I think, affirming the validity of alternate paths, so long as they honor our principles. Of course, not all of us accept spirituality as a meaningful concept. And not all of us have what we acknowledge as spiritual experiences. And we may have different spiritual experiences in response to the same stimuli. This disparity, this diversity, if you will, is okay in a Unitarian Universalist community. We should allow each of us to follow different spiritual paths and indeed encourage one another in doing so. Why should one thing speak to all of us in the same fashion? It's helpful for us to think of a spiritual path as a metaphorical mountain with many trails cut into its side. Discernment, enlightenment, if you will, means getting to the top so that we can view truth as the panorama that is in the valley actually is the valley all below us and all around us. The trouble is that we can't always predict which trail will work best for us. For that matter, postmodernism tells us that even if we eventually do get to the top, we can expect to encounter different panoramas, different spiritual truths, not all identical. We cannot say that one is closer to the absolute truth than another, or that any truth is absolute for that matter. You can blaze your own trail up that mountain, hacking through the underbrush with your trusty machete. And that strategy may work well for some spiritual sojourners. Others of us like the idea of using established trails, spiritual paths that have been trod by others. To me, the established trails represent religious traditions. I think most of us are here because we benefit from having some established spiritual paths and fellow sojourners with whom we can share our climb. We often hear people say, "I'm more spiritual than religious." I see those non-religious folks as blazing their own trails through the underbrush. But I dare say many of them soon grow weary and give up, and thus forego any further journey. In a religious community, we have the encouragement not only of our current fellow travelers, but also encouragement from those in history who have gone before us. Now, we as Unitarian Universalists are not going to march up that mountainside in some sort of lockstep formation. That works for some travelers who usually believe their path is the only path and often have rigid, preconceived ideas about what awaits them at the top. But we UUs insist on traveling at our own pace and taking occasional side trips to explore other paths toward the truth. Our third principle calls us to work together to encourage one another toward spiritual growth. However, we don't all experience the spiritual realm in the same way, of course. If we send 10 Unitarian Universalists into a room and charge them with defining spirituality, they'll come out with at least 12 definitions. But challenges arise from the fact that the spiritual realm, and I'm not talking about ghosts and seances, the spiritual realm is not material. We can describe it with adjectives or similes, or we can represent it with myth or story or metaphor. But we cannot correctly say what it is. It's in a way kind of like gravity. We experience gravity. Physicists have discerned gravitational laws, but you can't say, yet anyway, what gravity is. We understand it by what it does, its effects, but not existentially. So far this morning, I've employed a variety of literary devices. I've used terms like non-material or acceptance, a story about being dissed for exploring theistic ideas, a metaphor, the spiritual mountain with its many paths, and simile, the gravity comparison. Yet, one of the problems with bringing spirituality into a sermon is that I'm obliged to use language, a left brain tool, to describe a right brain process, if you will. So to convey a sense of spirituality, I resort to the aforementioned literary devices. Even so, that does not mean that our respective senses of spirituality are congruent. That's why some might say, that message today was way too spiritual. While someone else says, that message was not spiritual enough. My response to these assessments is to formulate a question or two. How do you access your spiritual side? And what does that side, what does it look like? Otherwise, an observation about spirituality is not necessarily clear to someone else. With these remarks, I'm trying to get to a more practical place in terms of encouraging spiritual growth. We provide a number of potentially encouraging spiritual elements in each of our worship services beyond the message. The ritual of the chalice lighting reminds us of our spiritual community as a beacon of the quest for truth and of our spiritual connections with the wider Unitarian Universalist community, where just about everyone similarly ignites a flame to open their services. There is the stone ritual that underscores the presence of both joy and pain in our lives. For many, this is a most important connecting point spiritually with one another as we share deeply life's ups and downs. There's the meditation or a reading, which brings in the perspectives of others who have traversed that spiritual mountainside. A very important piece of spiritual opportunity comes with the music we share on Sunday. To me, poetry is music written in words, and our hymns provide a double dose of the Spirit by combining poetic words and musical notes. In non-pandemic times, we may enjoy spirited choir performances that inspire our spirituality. There are preludes and postludes and music in between that encourages us to wax spiritual, to get in touch with our spiritual sides. Congregational experts generally agree that spiritual connections are often enhanced through small group experiences. We have several small groups that meet to encourage the spiritual growth of their members. A host of active committees like social justice and worship, support our spiritual journeys. These all represent opportunities to build community and hence affirm one another and encourage each other to spiritual growth through educational programs, informational opportunities, and discussion of issues, both on congregational and wider community levels. It is my hope that everyone can find a way to participate, and that as we slowly make our way out of the mire that is this pandemic, our participation will grow. You see, our third principle is really about embracing one another spiritually on a loving, non-material level. A closing observation. You cannot embrace anyone when, like the skeptical humanist, your arms are folded. May we succeed in keeping our arms opened wide. So might that be, and amen. Our closing hymn is number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
And it wouldn't be a religious service if we didn't talk about an offertory. You can log on to the UU Tampa website. That's at uutampa.org. And on the homepage there, you'll find a link to where you can make online a contribution to the life and work of this community of liberal faith. And of course, you can mail in your offerings as well to the church office. We shall now extinguish the chalice and permit me to share these Closing words from Reverend Michael Schuler. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the servant of truth. Question your convictions, for beliefs too tightly held strangle the mind and its natural wisdom. Suspect all certitudes, for the world whirls on, nothing abides. Yet in our inner rooms full of doubt, inquiry and suspicion, let a corner be reserved for trust. For without trust, there is no space for communities to gather or for friendships to be forged. Indeed, this is the small corner where we connect and reconnect with each other. So might that be, and amen. Our service is ended. Let us go in peace.